I lost the house today on account of this Christian life I'm living. It's getting in the way of this other stuff that I used to do and supplement my income, and we can't live here anymore. It was so strange because she said, honey, I don't care about this house. I care about you. You're all I ever wanted. So we packed up and moved to our first rental home. And we sat in that rental home for a while, and we began to work and go get involved in the church. And I said to her one night, I said, sweetheart, I said, I think God's calling me to be involved in a youth home. The very next day, I was in Manassas, Virginia, and I saw a sign that said Juvenile Services. I went in and met the people, told them who I was, what I wanted to do. And they said, well, if you want to do a Christian home, I'm sorry, but the county can't be involved in that. But a few days later, I got a piece of paper in the mail that clearly came out of someone's trash can. It was all crumpled up, and it had mustard on it and had coffee grounds on it, but there was a little note on it that said, heard you were here, thought this might be of interest to you, and it was signed by a guy named Wayne Moffett. It would be 5 years before I'd ever meet Wayne Moffett. But there was a picture of Joe Gibbs standing right there. Now look, I was born in Washington, D.C. I'm a Redskins fan. I know where I'm at. Don't get me wrong. Trust me, I know where I'm at. God, I need a miracle right now. And standing on either side of Joe Gibbs was Roger Staubach and George Bush. I thought, my God, these Texans have kidnapped Joe Gibbs. They couldn't beat him, so they stole him. But I began to read how Joe, of all things, had teamed up with these guys to do a youth home in the Washington, D.C. area, similar to what they were doing down here in Dallas. I said, man, I got to be involved in that thing. So I went to meet the guy that was running the home. His name was Clark Lawrence. I met someone in the last service that knew Clark. It was wonderful. And Clark is this absolutely wonderful guy. And what I'm about to tell you is so out of character for him, because after him and I met and had lunch and I told him about my background and where I came from and what I had done, he said this to me: you can never be involved in this youth home. He said, we have a builder, we have a developer, we have a concrete man, we got a painter, we got a drywall guy, we got a carpenter, we got a finished carpenter, we got everything we need, and we don't need you. I said, okay. A month went by, 2 months went by. I called him up and I said, Clark, how's the youth home thing going? He said, well, you know what, we're having trouble getting a building permit. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, meet me down at the county building at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. If I do anything to embarrass you, you'll never hear from me again. We went down there, and at 2 o'clock, we walked out with a building permit. He called me a couple days later. He said, hey, I told Joe what you did, and he wants to have breakfast with you. I said, of course he does. Now, he was also having breakfast with 600 other people, but who cares? I'm standing there at the Marriott in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there he is, standing right there. My real life, all-time personal hero, Joe Gibbs, standing right there. I could sense God's Spirit whispering in my ear. He said, I told you that old things would pass away and all things would become new. I'm saying, not now, not now. I'm talking to Joe Gibbs. And Joe said, hey, I heard what you did. I want you to be on our team. And I'm going, you've seen my moves, obviously. He said, not that team, fool. So they called me up and would invite me to these meetings. And I would go to these meetings. Now, when Joe Gibbs called a meeting in Washington, D.C., congressmen, senators, lawyers, doctors, business executives from all walks of life would show up, and me. And they would tell Joe if he lost the game on Sunday before, when we would meet on Monday, the things he did wrong. Of course, we all were experts. And we would talk football and everything, but whenever the conversation got around to the youth home, the questions came to me. And I'd make up something and tell them. And pretty soon I went home and I told my wife, I said, sweetheart, if I'm gonna hang with this crowd, I gotta get me some initials after my name. I said, because these guys all got initials and I got nothing. So I went out and had my cards made up. Michael Dean Chadwick, D-M-N. And I'd go to these meetings and I'd hand out my cards proudly with my nose up in the air, and I'd hand them out, and I'd see people get, Michael Dean Chadwick, D-M-N. And they go, he's a DMN. I said, yeah, no wonder. That's why Joe's got him here. He's a DMN. I said, yeah, pretty much. He says, you're a DMN? I said, yeah, pretty much. Every once in a while, someone would come to me and they'd go, now look, I personally know it's doctor, medical, nuclear, something like that. But Bill over here is like bugging me to ask you about this DMN thing. I said, oh, that's simple. It don't mean nothing. He said, no, I'm serious. What's it mean? I said, I'm serious too. It don't mean nothing. I just wanted some initials after my name so I could hang with you boys. You'd see him go back and talk to that other guy, and he would say, and it was awesome. It wasn't very long before they invited me to be on their board of advisors, and then they invited me to be on their board of trustees, and then Joe called me in one day and he said, hey, you have to be on the executive committee. And I'm thinking, Joe, if you ever find out about my past, I said, Joe, I cannot be on your executive committee. I said, I would never do anything to embarrass this youth home. He said, you think I don't know about your past? He said, man, he said, you're the only guy here that's got a heart for these boys. He says, you got to be on the executive committee. I said, I got to be on the executive committee? Why would I have to be on the executive committee? He said, because the board just voted you president. I said, do what? He said, you're now the president of Joe Gibbs Youth Home. I looked at that old boy that told me I'd never be involved in this thing. I said, I believe that means you work for me now. And I mean, for the next 2 or 3 years, a little over 3 years, I was making more money than Skippy had nuts. There would be pictures of Joe Gibbs and Michael Dean in the paper, Joe Gibbs and Michael Dean in an article, Joe Gibbs and Michael Dean in a magazine. Pretty soon people were saying, who is that guy with Big Daddy? No, not really, but I like saying it. Makes me feel good. And then, right smack in the middle of all of this, comes this recession. Now, I didn't know what a recession was, honestly. But I thought, how bad could anything be if the root word was recess? I mean, yes, they gave me my high school diploma if I promised never to come back. That's true. But I did excel in that one particular subject. Well, turns out it kind of got bad. And I had to resign from the youth home. And I had already built us another new home and things were going great. But then I had to go tell my wife, honey, I lost the house again today. Second time. I'm so sorry. She said, honey, I don't care about this house. She said, I got a man that's walking with God, who's a good daddy, who loves me and loves his children. She said, we can go live in a pup tent. As long as we have you and the children and you're walking with God. He goes, I don't care about this house. Well, I did. But we lost the house. But right smack in the middle of all that, now I'm going to quiz you on this. My wife's sister decided to get married, which in and of itself is no big deal, except my wife's sister was going to marry my nephew, which meant my nephew was going to become my brother-in-law. My sister-in-law was going to become my niece. Their kids and my kids would be first and second cousins. Everybody thought we were from West Virginia, which my wife is from West Virginia. We weren't sure it was legal. We all had to take DNA tests. Janice and the kids come by my office on the night of the wedding rehearsal and said, Daddy, can you come with us? And I said, yes, I can come, but I'm not coming now because as the daddy, what I'm doing is important. You all go. You all take off and go. I'll be along shortly. It wasn't very long after that my wife called and she said, Michael wants to talk to you, and put him on the phone. I said, son, what's up? He said, Daddy, I called to tell you that I love you. I said, well, that's great, son. I love you too. He said, no, Dad, I want you to know something. I love you. I love you too, son. Take care of your sisters. I'll be along shortly. I got to the church and I'm back there and they're singing, this is the day that the Lord hath made. It was a wonderful time. This woman comes in the back of the church and she said, there's been an accident out front. Is there anybody here named Chadwick? I said, honey, the Chadwicks are marrying the Chadwicks. Don't touch anything. She said, could you come? I said, well, sure, I'll come. So some folks went out this door and I went out the back door and sure enough, there'd been a wreck. My mom had pulled across 4 lanes of traffic and had been hit broadside. And I got there, but I could see that she seemed to be okay. But way off 30, 40 yards away, I looked and there was a crowd of people and I couldn't figure out what in the world were they doing. The accident's over here. What are they doing over there? And I began to scan the crowd and I saw Kelly and I saw Katie and I began to scan the crowd and I saw my brother coming at me and I said, where's Michael? He said, don't go over there. And I pushed the crowd away and laying on the ground was my little 8-year-old boy. Near as I can tell, he must have stood up when my mom went across that intersection, undone his seatbelt, and jettisoned him out the back window. We called for a helicopter that night. We couldn't get one. The rain was too bad, so we rushed him to a little country hospital. We got there and the doctor came out and he called me to come to the back room. I went back to this little makeshift room that made walls made out of curtains. And I said, just leave me with my boy. There was no monitors, there was no emergency equipment, there was just me and Michael. I began to think of every story I'd ever heard in this book about withered hands being made whole, about lepers being made whole, about blind men being made to see, about men sitting by a pool and being pushed in and becoming healed, and dead children being raised up, and water turned into wine, and miracle after miracle. I began to call on Jesus. Jesus, I got to have a miracle. I know you can do this. I got to have it because I cannot walk back down that hall and tell that woman down there that I've lost her boy. And I put my mouth on my little boy's mouth, and I took a deep breath, and I blew my life right into him, and I watched his breast rise and go down. I did it again. And I said, God, I cannot lose my boy, and I need this miracle. I said, I deserve it, but she does it. And I took the deepest breath of my life, folks. And I blew into that little boy as hard as I could, and I watched little Michael's breast rise up, and I said, okay, son, breathe. And I watched it go back down. And guys, my son's, he was cold, he was limp, he was gone, and Daddy couldn't fix it. I went back down that hallway. The next few days were filled with every parent's nightmare. I can remember after the service going back to the grave by myself and standing at that graveside and crying out loud and saying, God, why am the spasms in my back so bad? I fell on my knees, and God said, He said, don't say that. I said, God, nobody knows how I feel. He said, hold up, boss. I know exactly how you feel. Now you listen to me. I know how bad this hurts because you forget I stood at my son's grave one day. And just as sure as I knew that I'd see him again, yeah, it hurt. But you'll see Michael again. And I want you to know something. I'm in this thing. I'm in this thing. So don't you blow it. Somebody came and found me laying in that mud that night crying, soaking wet with mud and sweat all over me. They picked me up, carried me home. I never forgot that. It wasn't audible, but it might as well have been. He said, I'm in this thing. The night before, 24 hours before, there was an old missions conference at our church. On the way home that night, I said, Michael, I saw you at the missions conference going up to the altar and kneeling down and praying. I said, son, what were you saying? What were you doing?